comes in a startling surprise. Bleak heights are carpeted in radiant colors. Every crack and crevice of a frowning crag blossoms. The contrast of this laughing, luxuriant beauty with the clear-cut, austere grandeur all around arrests the attention sharply. Elsewhere, wild flowers may be little noticed, but never in Greece. That was as true in the days of old as it is now. In the faraway ages, when the tales of Greek mythology were taking shape, men found the bright blossoms of the Greek spring a wonder and a delight. Those people, separated from us by thousands of years, and almost completely unknown to us, felt as we do before that miracle of loveliness, each flower so delicate, yet altogether covering the land like a rainbow mantle flung over the hills. The first storytellers in Greece told story after story about them, how they had been created, and why they were so beautiful. It was the most natural thing possible to connect them with entities. All things in heaven and earth were mysteriously linked with the powers, but beautiful things most of all. Often an especially exquisite flower was held to be the direct occasion of an entity for his own purpose. That was true of the Narcissus, which was not like ours of that name, but a lovely bloom of glowing purple and silver. Zeus called it into being to help his brother, the Lord of the Dark Underworld. When he wanted to carry away the maiden he had fallen in love with, Demeter's daughter, Persephone, she was gathering flowers with her companions in the Vale of Enna, in a meadow of soft grass and roses and crocus and lovely violets and iris and hyacinths. Suddenly she caught sight of something quite new to her, a bloom more beautiful by far than any she had ever seen, a strange glory of a flower, a marvel to all, immortal entities and mortal men. By immortal entities, if they're real, they're talking about the jinn, right? 100 blossoms grew up from the roots, and the fragrance was very sweet. The broad sky above and the whole earth laughed to see it, and the salt wave of the sea. Only Persephone among the maidens had spied it. The rest were at the other end of the meadow. She stole toward it, half fearful at being alone, but unable to resist the desire to fill her basket with it, exactly as Zeus had supposed she would feel. Wondering, she stretched out her hands to take the lovely plaything, but before she touched it, a chasm opened in the earth, and out of it coal-black horses sprang, drawing a chariot and driven by one who had a look of dark splendor, majestic and beautiful and terrible. He caught her to him and held her close. The next moment she was being borne away from the radiance of the earth in springtime to the world of the dead by the king who rules it. This was not the only story about the Narcissus. There was another as magical, but quite different. The hero of it was a beautiful lad whose name was Narcissus. His beauty so great, all the girls who saw him longed to be his, but he would have none of them. He would pass the loveliest carelessly by, no matter how much she tried to make him look at her. Heartbroken maidens were nothing to him. Even the sad case of the fairest of the nymphs, Echo, did not move him. She was a favorite of Artemis, the female entity of the woods and wild creatures, but she came under the displeasure of a still mightier female entity, Hera herself, who was at her usual occupation of trying to discover what Zeus was about. I mean, marry somebody that you know, not have these problems with, maybe? Someone that you'd expect to be faithful, that has acted in such a way prior that, you know. However, she was immediately diverted from her investigation by Echo's joyous chatter. As she listened, amused, the others silently stole away, and Hera could come to no conclusion as to where Zeus's wandering fancy had alighted. With her usual injustice, she turned against Echo. That nymph became another unhappy girl, whom Hera punished. The female entity condemned her never to use her tongue again, except to repeat what was said to her. You will always have the last word, Hera said, but no power to speak first. Well, I think all this is sort of a lesson of you don't know who's what you're messing with when you're having an affair, right? Sometimes, even if you think the other person's single. That nymph became another unhappy girl whom Hera punished. The female entity condemned her to never use her tongue again except to repeat what was said to her. You will always have the last word, Hera said, but no power to speak first. I think I may have just said that twice, but I should put my finger in before I talk. This was very hard, but hardest of all when Echo too was with all the other lovelorn maidens. Loved Narcissus, she could follow him, but she could not speak to him. How, then, could she make a youth who never looked at a girl pay attention to her? One day, however, it seemed her chance to come. He was calling to his companions, "Is anyone here?" And she called back in rapture, "Here, here." She was still hidden by the trees, so that he did not see her, and he shouted, "Come." Just what she longed to say to him, she answered joyfully, "Come," and stepped forward from the woods with her arms outstretched. But he turned away in angry disgust. "Not so," he said. "I will die before I give you power over me." All she could say was humbly, entreatingly, "I give you power over me." But he was gone. She hid her blushes and her shame in a lonely cave, and never could be comforted. She still lives in places like that, and they say she has so wasted away with longing that only her voice now is left to her. So Narcissus went on his cruel way, a scorner of love, but at last one of those he wounded prayed a prayer, and it was answered by the entities. May he who loves not others love himself. The great female entity, Nemesis, which means righteous anger, undertook to bring this about, as Narcissus bent over a clear pool for a drink and saw there his own reflection. On the moment, he fell in love with it. "Now I know," he cried, "what others have suffered from me, for I burn with love of my own self. And yet, how can I reach that loveliness I see mirrored in the water? But I cannot leave it. Only death can set me free." And so it happened. He pined away, leaning perpetually over the pool, fixed in one long gaze. Echo was near him, but she could do nothing. Only when dying he called to his image, "Farewell, farewell." She could repeat the words as a last goodbye to him. They say that when his spirit crossed the river that encircles the world of the dead, it leaned over the boat to catch a final glimpse of itself in the water. The nymphs he had scorned were kind to him in death and sought his body to give it burial. But they could not find it. Where it had lain there was blooming a new and lovely flower, and they call it by his name, Narcissus. Another flower that came into being through the death of a beautiful youth was the hyacinth. Again, not like the flower we call by that name, but lily-shaped and of a deep purple, some say a splendid crimson. That was a tragic death, and each year it was commemorated by the festival of Hyacinthus that lasts throughout the tranquil night. In a contest with Apollo, he was slain. Discus throwing, they competed, and the entities cast sped beyond the goal he aimed at. And struck Hyacinthus full in the forehead with a terrible wound. He had been Apollo's dearest companion. There was no rivalry between them. When they tried which could throw the discus farthest, they were only playing a game. The entity was horror-stricken to see the blood gush forth, and the lad, deathly pale, fall to the ground. He turned as pale himself, as he caught him up in his arms and tried to staunch the wound, but it was too late. When he held him, the boy's head fell back, as a flower does when its stem is broken. He was dead, and Apollo, kneeling beside him, wept for him, dying so young, so beautiful. He had killed him, although through no fault of his, and he cried, "Oh, if I could give my life for yours, or die with you." Even as he spoke, the blood-stained grass turned green again, and there bloomed forth the wondrous flower that was to make the lad's name known forever. Apollo himself inscribed the petals, some say with Hyacinthus' initial, and others with the 2 letters of the Greek word that means alas. Either way, a memorial of the entity's great sorrow. There was a story, too, that Zephyr, the west wind, not Apollo, was the direct cause of the death, that he also loved this fairest of youths. In his jealous anger at seeing the entity preferred to him, he blew upon the discus and made it strike Hyacinth. And there's dots here, indicating that in the earlier version of the book, and in the earlier printing of the book, there was more to this book. Such charming tales, lovely young people who, dying in the springtime of life, were fitting changed into spring flowers, have probably a dark background. They give a hint of black deeds that were done in the far distant past, long before there were any stories told in Greece or any poems sung which have come down to us. Well, certainly those that didn't come down to us, right? Perhaps even before there were storytellers and poets, it might happen. If the fields around a village were not fruitful, if the corn did not spring up as it should, that one of the villagers would be killed and his or her blood sprinkled over the barren land. There was no idea as yet of the radiant entities of Olympus who would have loathed the hateful sacrifice. Mankind had only a dim feeling that, as their own life depended utterly on seed time and harvest, there must be a deep connection between themselves and the earth, and their blood, which was nourished by the corn, could in turn nourish it at need. But what more natural than if a beautiful boy had thus been killed, than to think, when latter the ground bloomed with narcissus or hyacinths, that the flowers were his very self, changed and yet living again. So they would tell each other it had happened, a lovely miracle which made the cruel death seem less cruel. Then, as the ages passed and people no longer believed that the earth needed blood to be fruitful, all that was cruel in the story would be dropped, and in the end forgotten. No one would remember that terrible things had once been done. Hyacinthus, they would say, died, not slaughtered, by his kinsfolk to get food for them, but only because of a sorrowful mistake. And yet we have more dots here. Myths certainly change as the use that people have for such things differs. Of these deaths and flowery resurrections, the most famous was that of Adonis. Every year the Greek girls mourned for him, and every year they rejoiced when his flower, the blood-red anemone, the wind flower, was seen blooming again. Aphrodite loved him, the female entity of love, who pierces with her shafts the hearts of entities and humans alike, was fatted herself to suffer that same piercing pain. She saw him when he was born, and even then loved him, and decided he should be hers. She carried him to Persephone to take charge of him for her, but Persephone loved him too, and would not give him back to Aphrodite, not even when that female entity went down to the underworld to get him. Neither female entity would yield, and finally Zeus himself had to judge between them. He decided that Adonis should spend half the year with each, and the autumn and winter with the queen of the dead, the spring and the summer with the queen of love and beauty. Female entity, queen, goddess. All the time he was with Aphrodite, she sought only to please him. He was keen for the chase, and often she would leave her swan-drawn car, in which she was used to glide at her ease through the air, and follow him along rough woodland ways, dressed like a huntress. But one sad day, she happened not to be with him, and he tracked down a mighty boar. With his hunting dogs, he brought the beast to bay. He hurled his spear at it, but he only wounded it, and before he could spring away, the boar, mad with pain, rushed at him and gored him with its great tusks. Aphrodite, in her winged car high over the earth, heard her lover's groan and flew to him. He was softly breathing his life away, the dark blood flowing down his skin of snow, and his eyes growing heavy and dim. She kissed him, but Adonis knew not that she kissed him as he died. Cruel as his wound was, the wound in her heart was deeper. She spoke to him, although she knew he could not hear her. You die, O thrice desired, and my desire has flown like a dream. Gone with you is the girdle of my beauty. But I myself must live, who am a goddess, and may not follow you. Kiss me yet once again, the last long kiss, until I draw your soul within my lips and drink down all your love. The mountains all were calling, and the oak trees answering, Oh, woe, woe for Adonis, he is dead. An echo cried in answer, Oh, woe, woe for Adonis. And all the loves wept for him, and all the muses too. But down in the black underworld Adonis could not hear them, nor see the crimson flower that sprang up, or each drop of his blood had stained the earth. And, of course, we hear more about that in the James George Fraser's The Golden Bough.